This video is about all the upgrades and changes that I did to my Royal Enfield Interceptor 650 2021. Some of the upgrades were performance related, and some of them to make the bike fit me better, and others because I fancied a change. The bike on the left is how I got the bike. It's bog standard apart from the Givy touring screen, heated grips, a USB connector on the handlebars, and a charge point down the side of the seat. The image on the right is how the bike ended up. There were lots of changes, and some of the changes were made a few times, particularly to the exhaust. The first thing I took off was the Givy screen. When I was riding back from picking up the bike on the motorway, the wind was blowing me all over the place, and I also didn't like the way it mounted. It had these pieces of metal that went into these brackets that bolted onto the handlebars, so that had to come off. I removed the centre stand for a couple of reasons. One is it's really heavy, and the other one is that it's very difficult to get it on the centre stand if you lower the bike. I also removed the handlebar crossbar. I didn't really need it. I didn't really like the look of it. I removed the USB from the handlebars. I didn't like it there. It was big and bulky. And I added one close to the seat so I could power my tank bag. One of the things I did very early on this bike is remove the grease from the relays. A few people seem to have problems with it, so I did that just in case. The next thing I wanted to focus on was the back of the bike. There's a passenger grab rail. I wanted to take that off. I don't take passengers, so it's not needed, and it was actually really heavy, so I wanted to get rid of that. And I wanted to change the light at the back and the indicators because they were massive and I didn't like the look of them. I also wanted to start making things darker, so I wanted to start painting things black. One of the things I wanted to do was reduce weight, and the exhausts on these bikes are really heavy. The next thing I did was replace the rear cones on the exhaust because it did two things. They were really light and I bought them in black, so it was a win-win situation. I also did a little bit of work on the front of the bike. I changed the indicators so they were the same as the rear indicators. The next job was to remove the tank badge. It looked okay, but it was plastic and I didn't like it, so that had to go. It was quite easy to do, just put a hairdryer on it, warmed it up a little bit, put a bit of string behind it and moved the string behind the badge, and it slowly came off, and then just cleaned up the residue behind it with a bit of WD-40. Tank looked good without any badges, but I think you need a badge on your tank. So I chose these. Very simple Royal Enfield type badge in black. I changed the levers on the handlebars. I didn't like the silver ones and they were non-adjustable, so I changed to black and adjustable. The next job was back at the front of the bike, and it was to complete the changes to the lighting. I wanted to put an LED light on. Also took the opportunity to paint the back of the light black and the brackets for the indicators. The next job was to have another look at the exhaust system. Although I'd replaced the rear cones in black, I didn't like the way half of it was chrome and half of it was black. As luck would have it, a 2-in-1 TEC exhaust came up second hand, and I grabbed that very quickly. I really did want to change the whole system, and this was a complete system, and it was so light. The only thing I didn't like about it was the side that didn't actually have an exhaust on. It looked empty. The side with the exhaust on looked great, but the other side very empty. Although I'd removed the Givy screen, I do like a screen on a bike, just not quite so big, and more importantly, the way it mounts must be out of the way, and this screen had a great mounting system. It had a bracket that went under the back of the clocks, so you could hardly see anything, and it's a dark screen, so it matched the bike very well. I had the original chrome mirrors on, so I swapped them out. Well, first of all, I swapped them for bar end mirrors. That was okay, they were in black, they were quite nice. But then I changed them to the Royal Enfield black standard mirrors. One of the problems with the foot pegs were they were a little bit low and a little bit forward. Also, I didn't like the way the gear change had a double mechanism on it. It seemed a bit loose. So I decided to change them for the foot pegs and brackets that came with the Continental, and they fit straight on. So the foot pegs are up a little bit and back a bit. And also the gear change doesn't have a linkage in it. I usually have a bit of a problem with seats. I usually find them too tall and I find them very uncomfortable. So I decided to change to the touring seat to see if it made much difference. It didn't. I like the look of the cowl on the back of the seat. So again, something came up for sale second hand, so I bought it straight away because it matched the bike. The only problem was there was no way to mount it to the seat I'd just put on, so I had to change the seat again to the Continental touring seat. Although I'd changed the colour of the front indicator mounts, it was still a bit big and bulky, and I didn't like the look of that, so I changed to these linkage type mounts, which leaves a lot of space and light between them. Next job was to put on some bar risers. That made quite a bit of difference, and at the same time made a bit of space underneath so I could move the heated grips controller. I wanted to paint the front mudguard, but I wasn't sure I'd like the look, so I bought a second-hand one and then rubbed that one down and painted it, and then if I decided I didn't like the colour, I could easily switch back. At the same time, I painted the front mudguard bracket. So I saw this image of a subframe that's cut down and it has a light in it. I like the look of it, but I didn't fancy cutting down my subframe. So I thought, well, I'll get the light and attach it to the rear of my subframe and do a similar thing. And maybe add some smaller LED indicators to the back and then the front. Then add these little lights that light up the number plate. This is how it looks with all the changes so far. Also, there's the TEC adjustable shocks on there. So this is probably the biggest change to the bike, changing the rear and front suspension. Hagen lowered shocks on the back, matched to my weight, and YSS front springs and preload adjusters. The next job was to move the seat cowl back a bit. It fitted on the seat nice, but left a gap between the end of the seat and the end of the subframe, so I wanted to move it back so the cowl lined up with the end of the subframe, and I did it by drilling a couple of holes in the cowl and moving it back and putting a little bit of plastic at the back to clip it underneath the subframe to hold it in tight, and it worked very well. It was a hot day, so I removed the screen and went out for a ride. I have two little LEDs in a tube on my handlebars. One of them is an alarm indicator and the other one is a battery indicator. So this is very useful. It goes straight to the battery, and without touching the bike, without turning it on, you can see what condition your battery is in. Very useful. I put this on all my bikes. One of the problems I had was I could not read the speedo without my glasses. The speedo digits are very small. It's got miles per hour and kilometers on there. So I added this GPS speedo, which was completely self-contained. It didn't connect to anything on the bike other than power, and it was incredibly accurate, big digits, and it updated very quickly. It was a bit ugly, but it did a very good job. One of the things I wanted to try was adding a top box. They're incredibly practical. They're can hold a lot of stuff and they're pretty secure. I was used to using one when I went to work every day. I used to throw my stuff in it, and I wanted to try out and see what it looked like on this bike. I hated it. One of the things I wanted to do was see if I could extend my riding season. I'm a bit of a fair weather rider now. I don't like being hammered with rain. I definitely don't like being cold. So I thought I'd see if I can convert the bike for the colder season. Ironically, quite similar to the screen I took off in the first place, and some handguards. One of the things I realised is when I turn full lock on the handlebars, I get pulled forward. And because I'm short, I pivot on the seat and it lifts me up, meaning that I lose traction on my feet. So I removed the bar risers and added some up and back risers, and they were much better. So I'd added a big screen and some handguards, and I disliked it completely. So I took all that off and I found a Kappa screen, and I liked the Kappa screen because it was a fairly big screen, blocked a lot of the wind, but it didn't have that horrible connection onto the handlebars. So finally, having an empty space on one side of the bike without an exhaust irritated me, so I sourced some Power Range exhaust, and they're very similar to 2-in-1, except it's 2-in-2, and it's got no cats in it either. So it was very light but had an exhaust each side, and they sounded fantastic. When I changed the exhaust system, which didn't have any cats in it, it allowed the air to flow through the exhaust system more freely, which meant it probably ran a little bit lean. I also opened up the inlet on the air filter, which probably did the same thing. So I added a fuel management system which tricked the EC unit and made it run a little bit richer, and that worked very well. One of the things that always concerned me about this bike is the tubed tyres. Although I like the look of the spoked wheels, I really fancied black wheels because it matched the bike, and also I fancied tubeless tyres. Someone offered me a swap for my wheels and tyres for theirs. It was a straight swap, and I ended up with black alloys, and that matched the bike, I think, much better. One of the things I wanted to do was have some luggage carrying capability, but I tried the top box and it looked horrible on this bike. The Ducati Scrambler pannier rails fitted really well, and then I added some panniers that I already had, but they were massive and they really didn't look right. So I bought these really cheap leather looking side cases, very small, but they had enough carrying capability for what I wanted. So things like a first aid kit, a high-vis jacket, a water bottle, a sandwich, bits and bobs that you carry with you. Anything else I would have just stuck a bag on the back. One of the things I wanted to try was one of the Aochi units that had CarPlay on it. Although I had the GPS Speedo, it was ugly and huge. So the Aochi, because it had CarPlay, I thought I might be able to add a GPS Speedo to my iPhone and use that instead, but I tried so many apps and none of them would work with CarPlay, so that didn't work. So although the Aochi C3 didn't work because I couldn't get any of the GPS Speedos to work with CarPlay, I didn't give up, and I got hold of the Aochi BX, which is sort of the top of the range, and that has its own GPS Speedo built into it. It also has cameras, and it has radar for detecting cars coming up behind you, tyre pressure monitors, it has everything, and actually that worked really well. So what's next on this bike? I pretty much changed everything I wanted to change. I matched it to what I wanted on a bike. I got all the electronics I could possibly want on the Aochi, and it was great, but I felt like there was nothing more I could do, so I decided it was time for a change, and I sold that and went for the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, and I fancied trying something different, and I hadn't had a 450 or a single for a really long time, so that's the new bike, and that's the bike I'll probably be working on and making a few changes to.